All right, hello everybody. So I've been telling y'all that eventually I will share my life's testimony with the world because I've never done it before. And I know I've been kind of putting it off. I said this a few weeks ago, but several things have been causing me to put it off, but mostly because I know I'm gonna probably get emotional when doing it. And I may even shed a few tears, but you know, there's a time and place for everything, and I think now is the time for me to go ahead and reveal my testimony. So I also shared this morning a couple of pictures about why people give testimonies and what a testimony is. And just for those, real briefly, for those who don't know what a testimony is, usually it's about a person giving their story, their early life story, and explaining the things that brought them to faith, or the changes or events in their lives that helped bring them to God and different realizations and things like that, to just share and inspire others. Testimonies are usually given in church and in front of a crowd or congregation. But nowadays, in this day and age, there are millions, if not billions, of testimonies online that are recorded testimonies, just like the one I'm about to do now. And so I just figured I would record mine since I'm not a member of a church right now. And excuse me guys for this view and the way my camera is set up, but I left my brace at home that I usually hold my phone with, so now I just got it propped up in the corner of this. I got it propped up in the corner of this shelter I'm sitting in. So let me get started because it's kind of long, and plus it looks like it's gonna rain out here. So this, my friends, is the testimony of John, me. So I want to start with my very first memory in life. The very first thing I remember. I can remember a lot of things from my childhood, and it's strange. And I'm gonna tell y'all right now, y'all gonna hear a lot of things in my testimony that are gonna sound very weird and strange and supernatural even, but I promise y'all everything I'm about to tell y'all is true. I got no reason to lie, try to deceive anybody. All of these things truly happened to me. So let me get started. My very first memory, I was an infant, and what I remember is I opened my eyes and all of my family, my immediate family. So in my mother's household, my mother had 5 kids, and my sister Marianne, Daphne, Chad, Pam, and then me. I'm the youngest. I'm actually the youngest out of all of my siblings, even my half brothers and sisters. I'm still the baby. But in any case, in my mother's house, it was always us 5 and my mom. So my first memory when I opened my eyes was my whole family was staring down at me, and they were looking at me with a look on their faces of like they were all worried about something, and they were all looking at me. And when I opened my eyes, I can see their facial expressions change. I remember this. I was just a baby. And I later learned, well, I remember having the thought, even in my young mind, uh-oh, what happened? Like, what did I do? But I later learned that my sister Daphne had dropped me on my head, right on top of my head. And my whole head caved in. Because when you're a baby, your head is still soft, your cranium is soft, and it could even be molded. But what happened was, my sister Daphne, while holding me, she didn't intentionally drop me, but she made a mistake, and I slipped out of her hands and I dropped on my head. And when my head caved in, my mother began rubbing my head furiously, rubbing the top of my head, trying to make it pop back out. And by the grace of God, thankfully, it did. It popped back out. This is what they all told me later. So that was my first memory, and then a lot of other things happened in my childhood to where I almost lost my life several ways. I got hit by a car while I was still young, barely out of diapers, trying to follow my sister Pam across the street to get some fruit. She told me, "Stay back, don't you follow me." And being hard-headed as I was, I tried to follow her anyway. We was living in Condon Gardens. I was born 1979, December 15th. And when my mom left Morton Plant Hospital, she took me to Condon Gardens. That's where we was living at. That's in Clearwater, Florida. So a lot of my first memories and experience happened there. And then we moved to another part of Clearwater, Eldridge, Garden Avenue. And I spent a lot of my years there, a couple of years there. Then we moved across Betty Lane on Overly. We stayed in the house there. And then in 1988, my mother married my stepfather, and we moved to Safety Harbor, which I spent from there to 1997 living in Safety Harbor. So most of my childhood and youth are memories from Clearwater and Safety Harbor. So the next thing I want to talk about, the next major event in my life that I want to speak about, is what led me ultimately on my search and seek for wisdom and knowledge and things like that. And it was October 18th, 1995, because on that very day, a star was born. My daughter, Takira Blunt. This was my firstborn. And I remember holding her and having these thoughts that just thoughts I can't even explain. But I had these thoughts that, wow, I made this. I love this child. She was my everything. She was so beautiful and so sweet and so innocent. And I remember thinking, I have to protect her from everything in the world, from every evil, from every sin, from every person who might want to harm her. I have to protect her from everything. I remember being flooded with emotions about this. And while I was having these thoughts, I had a remembrance about a parable in the Bible where Jesus is called the rich man and Lazarus, where Jesus is telling a story about a beggar named Lazarus and a rich man. And Lazarus used to sit outside this rich man's home begging for, food and scraps and things like that. And then they both die and they both descend, or they go down. They're either in supposedly, symbolically supposed to be in hell or the abyss or somewhere like that. But in this story, the rich man, he's being tormented. He's in great pain and he's burning and like he's on fire. And he looks across the gulf and he sees the beggar Lazarus with Abraham, laying with his head on Abraham's bosom, and he's being comforted by Abraham. And this rich man is in such pain. He recognizes Lazarus, and basically, in short, he asks Abraham, Father, I'm in pain and I'm in torment over here. Could you come to me and please save me or whatever? And Abraham says something to him of the effect of, he asked Abraham if he would send Lazarus over there, if he would let Lazarus dip his finger in some water and bring it over there and put it on his tongue, basically, because he was so hot and so tormented. He wanted even a drop of water from Lazarus's finger. And Abraham told him, well, remember, in your lifetime, you were rich and you had everything you wanted and you were comforted up there, and Lazarus had nothing. But now here in this place, you're being tormented and Lazarus is being comforted. And even if we wanted to come over there and help you, there's a great gulf between us, and so that we can't cross over there to you and you can't cross over to us. And I remember the rich man saying, well, if you won't send Lazarus to me, send him to my family, or you all go to my family and warn them about this place, so that they won't end up and share my fate, so that they will never come here. And that story always stuck with me. And so when I was holding my baby, I remembered that story. And I said, you know, if a place like this really does exist, I want to find out the truth about it. If there really is a hell and a heaven and all these things, it's my duty to find out the truth of these things, so that as my child grows, I can tell her and instruct her about, yes, baby, this is real. Or no, baby, you know, don't believe in that, and so on and so on. That was what truly spurred me to start seeking knowledge. And so next, you know, I want to talk about the first time something happened in my life that seemed truly spiritual or supernatural. And this was in 1997. I was in boot camp, Pinellas County boot camp, and you know, they were very strict there and didn't allow us to have a lot of things. And so the only books we were allowed to have was the Bible. And by this time, I loved to read. So I just want to back up real quick and explain one thing. In my childhood, my sister Pam, the next one up over me in age, she was my little teacher. She always used to try to, you know, look after me and boss me around. Now, all of my siblings looked after me, you know, and my sister Mary Ann, she used to always keep me with her too and carry me around and stuff. But my sister Pam, us being so close in age, me, her, and my cousin Shauna, we used to hang around a lot because Pam and Shauna was always together. And so, but anyway, when we were home, Pam would always be trying to teach me something. And so my mama appointed her my little teacher. She said, hey, you teach Anthony everything. Show him this, show him this, show him this. And she didn't miss a beat. She took to that role like nothing I've ever seen. My sister would sit me down every day and make me read. She taught me first all the words I know. She taught me how to spell my name. She taught me how to spell my parents' names and all my brothers and sisters' names. She taught me my birthday. She taught me my social security number. She taught me our address. She said, in case you ever get lost or you ever get kidnapped, you can tell the police who your parents are and who your family is and where you live, and they can bring you back home to us. So before I ever stepped foot in a school or kindergarten, I was way ahead of those other kids. I already knew how to read, write, all of that stuff. And this always helped me through my life. I was always advanced. But anyway, in boot camp, so basically what I was getting at is I began to love to read. And so I would read all of the little, you know, books that was proper for kids to read. All the Dr. Seuss books, Aesop's Fables, anything that was appropriate for me to read, I would read it. But by the time I went to boot camp, I was 16. And this is how my eyesight became bad, because they would turn the lights off every night very early. And it would be pitch black in my cell, but I would still be trying to read my Bible. And y'all know a Bible got small print. So that's how I first started to damage my eyes, reading in the dark. So don't y'all read in the dark or a low light, unless y'all want big bifocals like me. But anyway, one night after I got done reading my Bible, I went to sleep. And I got woke up by a gust of air or wind in my cell. And something was flying all around in my cell. Whoosh, 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 all around me and telling me, get up, get up. You have to get up. You have to wake up. You have to get up. And I didn't know what was going on or what was in that cell with me, but something I knew, and I just had this feeling something is terribly wrong. Whatever this is, whatever this spirit is in my room, is trying to warn me of something. It's trying to warn me that something is terribly wrong. Something is going on with my family. And we were only allowed to make, like, I want to say one phone call a week or something like that in boot camp, home to our families. They didn't allow us to make many calls. But the next morning, so all that night, I couldn't rest. I couldn't sleep. And I was being bothered by that spirit for a long time. But it finally left. But I couldn't go back to sleep because I didn't know what had happened. Like I said, this was the first time anything like that had happened to me. The very next morning, I asked the drill instructors, I said, please, will y'all let me call my family? Because I feel like something is wrong. Something happened. Something bad happened to my family. And they were kind of looking troubled because they had already received a call from my mother. And they said, yeah, John, you can call home. And I called my mama and I say, Mama, what's going on? Like, is everybody all right? Did something happen? And I can tell by her reaction that something was wrong. But in any case, she told me, she said, yeah, your cousin Bay got killed yesterday. Bay, that's my cousin Leslie Fleming. She got murdered by her husband right in front of their kids. Left us all scarred. But that was the first tragic incident of my life and the first supernatural experience I ever had. And so I just had to mention that because that was also a starting point. I loved my cousin very much. It's strange because right before I went to boot camp, she and I had just started to get close and start communicating a lot because I got stuck on Greenwood in Clearwater one night and I needed a ride back to Safety Harbor, and she drove by me and she was like, cuz, what you doing? I'm like, I need a ride home. And she was like, get in, cuz, I'll take you. She was driving an Audi. And she drove me to Safety Harbor, and on that drive, we had a long talk. And I love and I miss my cousin. But anyway, the next thing that happened that I want to talk about is the first time I remember clearly hearing God speak to me. So by this point, it was 1997 still. I got out of boot camp and I came home, jumped right back into the streets, started doing all kinds of stuff, you know, selling drugs and getting high and things like that, because at the age of 15, I started to use cocaine because a lot of my friends who I hang around who was older than me, they were doing it. And one night and I used to ask them all kind of questions like, what do y'all do that for? Like, what did it do to you? Because I noticed that they all would act somewhat different on it. And so, snorting cocaine. And so they would all tell me different reactions. And so I remember thinking, well, it wouldn't do nothing to me. I used to smoke a lot of weed already. I was like, it wouldn't do nothing to me. You know what I'm saying? This and that. And so on a dare, they dared me. Well, we dare you to take some. And I ended up taking some. And I never stopped. Not that I was addicted to it for me not being able to put it down, but I was addicted to the feeling it gave me and the energy it gave me, because I love to stay awake and I love to have energy. So from 15 to 40, from the age of 15 to 40, I dabbled with cocaine on and off, snorting it. But anyway, I remember that my big brother, Chad, the one who lived in the house with me. My mom had 3 girls and 2 boys. Me and my brother Chad were the only 2 boys. And, I remember, Chad was, everybody who know my brother know he was always gone. Always, always, always going to some type of program. And then later it was prison. And then he just stayed in and out of prison. And he does long periods of time. So he's in prison right now. But he does long periods of time. And so I never really had guidance from my brother. You know what I'm saying? Or any of my other brothers, who were my half brothers. Not until much later in life, when we began to get closer, did I started to get any guidance from them. But as a youth, I didn't really have a lot of guidance from my brother. So all my big brothers was my big homies and the dudes in the streets and around St. Harbor and Clearwater, who I would hang around or who I would look up to, and out of all of them, so those was my role models, the drug dealers and the street dudes and stuff like that. But out of all of them, there was one guy who I wanted to be like the most. And his name was Mike Green. These days, he's a great man, a good brother. He went to feds, got out, and now he got his life together. But I remember I used to look up to him the most out of everybody. And I wanted to be like him. Because I just thought he was so cool, and he was tall and, had a nice build. And I was kind of growing up to be kind of similar to him in build. And so I was like, I want to be like that one day. And so these are the guys I looked up to. But anyway, all of this stuff, led me to live a street life. I was selling drugs. And in the streets, I was robbing people and doing all that too. And even though, people like Mike and all them, they weren't robbing people and all that, I picked up that stuff on my own. And so at the age of 15, as a matter of fact, my stepfather, who we were living with at the time, he was a street man. And so he had rules. He said, if you're going to be living here in my house and under my roof, you're going to abide by certain rules. And so I used to want to stay out in the streets all night on Maple Way and at Clara's out there in St. Harbor with my friends selling dope, because that's when you're going to make most of the money at night. So I wasn't trying to hear that, curfew thing when he told me that. So he said, well, if you think you man enough where you don't have to listen to my rules, then you can hit the door. There go the door right there. So you know what I did? Packed my little stuff and moved out. So from the age of 15 on, I left my mama's house and I started living in motels. I lived in all the motels along Gulfta Bay and US 19 in Clearwater. And I would just stay there selling dope. I was making plenty enough money to take care of myself. And so I started staying in motels, selling dope. And I would get rental cars. I would get basic cars. Even though I bought a car, I had them bought me a Ford Galaxy at 15. So I started just living in the streets, taking care of myself. And that is what led me to robbing and all that stuff too, because I was just wild by that point. But anyway, all of that led me to depression. Also, me and my baby mama separating, and me and her kind of going through it. And at that point in time, she was being kind of mean and kind of trying to keep me away from my daughter. And that greatly depressed me, because as I told y'all, my daughter was my world. So all of this stuff led me to depression. One night, I drove out to the causeway, the Courtney Campbell Causeway, and I parked, and I was sitting, and I started talking to God, and I started praying. And I remember I went out there to take my life. I had a 9mm, and I was just tired, because during all these times I kept, I was having thoughts of why am I here? Why was I born? What's my purpose? I was having these thoughts even at that young age, and I just felt disgusted by the stuff that I was seeing in the world and by the stuff that I was doing. I knew that these things weren't right and that these things weren't for me. And so I was torn all the time. And so I went out there to take my life that night, and I even called my mama, I called my sister Pam and them, and I said goodbye to them. I said, I'm about to leave, and they begged me, no, don't do it, and they kept asking where I was at, but I wouldn't tell them, of course. So I hung up the phone with them and I was talking to God, praying to him. God wasn't speaking back to me. I get to the point now, which I will talk about later, to where I can actually conversate with God back and forth. But at this time, I was just doing all the talking and crying out. And this was the first time God spoke to me. I remember him saying, John, don't do it. Give me one more day and I'll give you something to live for. He said, give me one more day. And I was shocked and astonished because I was like, I realized that a divine presence had spoke to me. And I've always had a fear of the Lord. So that prompted me to hold off. And I said, oh, okay, God, I'll give you one more day to show me why I should live. And so I left the causeway and I drove back to St. Harbor because I was going to go out there because that's where I would start my mornings off selling drugs. So when I turned into Safety Harbor, I turned down a certain street and I saw two girls walking. One was Krista and one was Dawn. They were best friends. And when I saw Krista, my whole face lit up and changed because I was like, wow, there's that girl, there she is. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. And when I first had seen her and met her, she was dating a friend of mine. She was dating my best friend. And so what they did, they hooked me up with another one of her best friends. But in my heart, I always wanted to be with Krista because for some reason, I just felt like she was different and she was special. So when I first saw her, it was love at first sight. I wanted to be with her. And even though I didn't do anything to cross my friend or whatever to try to be with her, she and I did begin to talk on the phone and do all types of stuff later. And then we cut it off and I didn't see her for 2 years. So this is the girl who I ultimately end up marrying and being with for 25 years. And I was married to her for 18 years. So like I said, when I saw her, something in me stirred and I said, this is what God told me to hold off for. This is, why he told me to wait and said he would give me something to live for, because I will tell you, when I saw her again, I was rejuvenated. I had a new spark and a zest for wanting to continue life because I wanted to try to get with her. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is the first time I tried to kill myself, because it's related to this. So Krista and I started dating. Her and Dawn and a couple of other people our age, we're all grown and we're all friends and stuff now. So, I hope nobody don't mind me mentioning their names, but they were all trying to go to Halloween Horror Night. Her, Dawn, Duriel, Edward, all of them. And so they needed a ride. And I was driving a stick shift Mustang, a brand new Mustang. But they didn't know how to drive a stick shift, her and Dawn, so they asked, would you teach us how to drive this car so that we could take it to Halloween Horror Night? And because I wanted to be with Krista so bad, I said, yeah, I'll let y'all hold it, I'll teach you. So I taught them quickly how to drive it and let them hold it, and they all went to Orlando to Halloween Horror Night. Okay, so Krista and I start dating. And I was also messing with a girl named Keisha who lived in Safety Harbor. And so they started having little beefs and spats and stuff like that. And I want to say that I ended up getting them both pregnant around the same time or so. This is what was said. But in any case, they ended up having a fight and Krista lost the baby she was carrying. And this made her depressed. And anyway, she and I started having an argument about it one day, and I left her mother's house, in a huff. I said, well, I'm leaving or whatever. I'm going out. So I was going out, go to Clara to sell some drugs. And there wasn't any cell phones back then. We all had beepers. Well, cell phones existed, but people ain't have them like what they got now. It's like everybody had beepers back then. You had to go to a payphone to call people back and stuff, unless you wanted that big old cell phone that was about this big with a backpack. But anyway, I leave the house and she was blowing my phone up, 911, 911, and whatever the other little text was, it was numbers, but it meant I love you. And I was ignoring her, being a butthole. And eventually she stopped paging me or whatever. So I said, something is wrong, something not happening. So I went back to her mom's house and I went in. You know, the door was unlocked because she wasn't answering. I was knocking, it was unlocked. So I just went in the house. And the first thing I seen was her feet and her legs on the floor in the kitchen, like she had fallen or something. So I rushed in the kitchen and she was laying in a bunch of water because she had spilled, when she fell, she spilled over a pitcher of water or something like that, probably whatever she used to swallow all those pills. She tried to take her life. She swallowed a bunch of pills and OD'd. And so I picked her up off the floor and I took her in her room, and I took all of the wet clothes off of her, put a dry shirt on or whatever, and I was so distraught, and I said, I don't want to live without this girl. And damn, she tried to kill herself because of our argument. And I remember thinking, well, if she's gonna go, then I'm going with her. So what did I do? I started swallowing the pills. I took a whole bunch of pills and it immediately started making me very sleepy. I OD'd too. And I laid down in the bed with her and passed out. Apparently her mother, when she got off work, she came home and she found us both in the room passed out, and she called the paramedics and the police. So they arrived or whatever. They realized we had overdosed because they seen the pill bottles and all of that stuff. And they Baker acted us. And they had to pump our stomachs and all of that. But we almost died. So that was a very scary day and tragic experience. So now, these are the things that started me truly on my walk of faith. All of these next incidents that started to happen. I was in the county jail facing a life sentence. This was also at the end of 97. As a matter of fact, this was 1998. I was in the county jail facing a life sentence because they said I had robbed somebody, a strong arm robbery. No, an armed robbery. And even though I didn't do it, a lot of people was telling on me and stuff by that time. And so somebody called the police anonymously and said it was my cousin. My cousin, he told the police that I did this anonymously, but I later found out it was him. Anyway, which cousin isn't important, but he told the police that it was me. So that's how I became a suspect. But I was facing a life sentence in the county jail, and I was laying on my bunk and I was praying and I was talking to God. And I was telling him, well, I don't want to get life or whatever. So, I was reaching out to God and things like that. And so God spoke to me and said, get up and go to the bookshelf. There's a couple of books there I want you to get and read. So I got up, I walked over to the bookshelf, and I looked down at it. I said, which books, Lord? He said, that one, that one, that one, and that one. The first book he told me to pick up was the Holy Bible. The second book he told me to pick up was the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. The third book he told me to pick up was called the Celestine Prophecy. And the fourth book was The Hobbit, the first book in the Lord of the Rings series. So it's trying to stop my recording. So I picked up these books and I began to read them. all of them, each of them, one by one, I began to read. I had already read the Bible before, from cover to cover, but as I'm gonna tell y'all later, I always read the Bible. I done read the Bible a lot of times, cover to cover, and I never tire of reading it, just like I never will. But you know, I knew God told me to pick it up for a reason, because every time I read the Bible, God reveals something new to me anyway. So that's why I never get tired of reading the Bible. So anyway, all of these books reveal something different to me about life and creation and everything, but they all spawn things in me to let me know that everything isn't as it seems, and there's a lot more to reality than what people think. The next book I was instructed to read was called The Chariots of the Gods. And this was the first book that somebody actually brought to me and said, hey man, God told me to bring you this book. In my lifetime, as y'all gonna hear in a few minutes, many people have came to me and said, hey man, I was sitting there reading, or I was just laying down and God told me to bring you this, or a voice told me to bring you this. This has happened to me countless times. Countless times. And I started to take note and pay attention to this, because after it happened 3 or 4 times, I'm like, man, something strange is going on, and all these people ain't coming to me. These will always be total strangers. People I'm not even talking to, communicating with, doing nothing with. They don't know me from Adam and Eve. I might be in a dorm with 70, 80 people, and these people just come up to me, hey man, such and such and such and such. Just like that, just like I said. Not knowing if I'm a spiritual person, believing in God or nothing, sometimes this has happened. But in each incident that this happened, there was something special in each. It was always material, either religious material or books of knowledge with some type of knowledge in them. And I learned something from each one. So I always knew that God was directing me. So, you know, and also that was when, also during that bid in the county jail, I first learned of what Gnosis was and began to do a lot of studying on that. So I never got out. I went and did 5 years straight. That was my first time going to prison. I did a year in the county, 4 years up the road. So I wrote a little bit of my testimony out to make it easier for y'all, so I won't just ramble on. So this is what I wrote. I was often in jail somewhere or another, and because I had a bad temper, I often ended up in confinement. But by this time, I developed insatiable thirst for reading and would read any and every book I could get my hands on. Not only to pass the time, but also to gain as much knowledge as I could about the world and everything in it. Ancient knowledge and books about antiquity attracted me the most, but none more so than the Bible itself. I read it and reread it and reread it in its entirety, cover to cover, many times. Often the only book I was allowed to have in confinement was the Bible, but that was absolutely okay with me, because not only was it my favorite book, God revealed something new to me every single time I would read it, which I thought was awesome. By the way, I also read the other books I named more than once, and since then, many, many others. During these times of reading, I learned of telepathy, telekinesis, and astral projection, and also alchemy. I began to seek out every piece of literature I could find out about these subjects, and also experimented with trying and attempting each to see if there was any truth to them. You see, I have always, since my youth, tested and tried everything, especially theories and hypotheses, because I have always wanted to know things, not simply to believe something may be true or real based off the words of others or something I've been told. Remember also, I wanted to know the truth about everything so that I could pass on the knowledge to my little star, my baby, of what was the true and what was a lie, so that no one could ever deceive her. I did most of my learning in my life just as much for her and the rest of my family as for myself. Okay, the next supernatural experience I want to talk to y'all about, it happened at OCI, which is Orlando Reception Center. This was very strange. So what happened was, some visitors were coming to the prison that day to come and speak to us, some church people. Can't remember who it was, but I want to say it was Kenneth Copeland's wife. I remember it being a woman. And I remember back then they used to come around and do a lot of stuff at prisons, or it could have been Joyce Meyer. It was some white woman who was preaching, and she had a whole congregation with her, and a group of people, Christians, came to the prison. So they were speaking on the rec yard. So we all went out there, me and a bunch of my friends, and back then I was very thugged out. I had a mouth full of gold, tattoos, everything. I was a gangster. And I remember this day specifically because me and all my friends, we were standing. Listen, there was, probably 1,000 people on the rec yard. Very big crowd. And me and my friends, we were all the way at the back. All the way at the back. Because, truth be told, we really didn't have no interest in what they came to talk about or what they had to say, really. We went out there just to go to rec, and basically, as guys will tell you who done been to prison before, a lot of times when them visiting stuff come like that, dudes go out there just to see the women, and the ladies that they bring with them and stuff like that. So that was probably more of our motivation than actually going out there to get the message. But me, I wasn't really studying the women or none of that. I just went outside with my friends. Anyway, we was all standing at the back, and I remember I was halfway listening to the lady and listening to the message because I got, an interest in God and the truth. So I was listening somewhat to the lady, but while I was looking at her, I noticed 3 men standing next to her in a straight line out to the side. 3 men. They appeared to be white men, but the reason why they stood out to me is because they appeared to be a little lighter than everybody else on the stage, and they were all staring directly at me. I could tell as I was looking at them, they were looking directly back at me. So this kind of unnerved me a little bit. I was like, why are these guys staring at me? I was looking around and shit. Well, excuse me. I was looking around and stuff, like to make sure that they weren't looking at nobody else, and they was looking directly at me. These 3 men, they walked off the stage and they started coming through the crowd, and they were making a beeline straight for me. The entire time they were walking, they never took their eyes off me, and I never took my eyes off them. I watched them the entire time from that stage through the crowd to me, and they weren't speaking. What stood out to me about them is they weren't speaking to the people they were passing. They seemed to be being polite, and they were moving people slightly out of their way and to the side like this with their hands as they came through that crowd. It was a big crowd. It was nothing but criminals and gangsters and thugs, and they walked right through them. And they got right in front of me, and they said back then we used to be able to have our shirts off and stuff on the red yard. So I'm standing there with all these tattoos and looking crazy at these people. And they walked up to me, and I remember them saying, "What is your name?" And I said, "My name's John Blunt." They said, "Nope, not anymore. Your name is John Sharp, because you are going to be a sword for the Lord. You are going to be a powerful weapon for the Lord, a sword." This is what they told me. And then they reached out, the guy in the front, and he shook my hand. And all of my friends who were standing there was just kind of looking crazy at the dudes, because they could obviously see these guys too. But they all, when I looked at them, I could tell they all had a look of astonishment on their face, because I'm telling you, I was the worst out of all of us. And nobody, not even me at the time, believed that statement that I was going to be anything for the Lord directly because I was so bad. So these guys, they left. And they went and they walked back through the crowd the same way they had came, and they got back up on the stage and they stood behind that woman who was preaching. And I just shook it off. I laughed it off. I don't know what they talking about. And that was the end of that. Next. So I started having these experiences where I would be pinned down. First in North Carolina twice, and then in Holiday, Florida 3 times. And the last time this happened, something entered me. Afterward, it was as if I was seeing through 2 sets of eyes. I told my wife about this. So I would have these experiences where every now and then, every few months, as soon as I would be alone sometime or after some type of event happened, usually after an event where I got really, really angry about something, boom, I would get pinned down. I would always be sitting down in a chair and something would pin me down and hold my arms behind my back, behind the chair like this. And I could not move. The only thing I would be able to move is my head. And when this would happen, it would feel as if I would feel a shift of energy in the air around me. And the next thing I would feel is something pulling on my body, as if, the only way I can explain it, as I explained to my wife and to some of my friends who I've told these stories to right here, it felt as if something was trying to snatch or pull my very skeleton out of the back of my body. It would always be pulling this way. I would be held down like this, and something would be pulling from the front of me to the back of me, all the way, my whole, from the head to the feet. Something would be pulling as if it was draining me of something or sifting something from me. And after each of these experiences, then eventually it would let me go, and I would always feel better or refreshed somewhat. But on the very last time incidents this happened, I was in Holiday, Florida. Me and my wife was living in Holiday. During this time, me and her marriage had gotten rocky, and we was talking about separating and all of this. We had an argument, and she walked out of the house, got in the car, and left. And I was very mad. And I was sitting down at the table. Boom, it happened again. I got pinned down. But this time, as I was looking up, it directed my face to look up. I saw something come from the ceiling. It was white, grayish. It looked like smoke. It looked like what you would assume a spirit would look like. And it came down and it descended upon me and it entered my body. Hey, how you doing, man? And once it got into me, it started somewhat controlling my body. Like, it took my head and it started turning and looking all around my house. And it was identifying with me in my brain, because I could see everything it was looking at through my eyes, and I can hear every thought that it was having. It was saying, it was like my brain was communicating with it and teaching it. It was like, that is a bookshelf. That is a fish tank. That is a dog. That is this. That was this. That's a VCR. That's a TV. That's a DVD. Like, as it was moving my head around, my brain was telling it everything it was seeing. And I knew that my brain was talking to this entity or whatever had entered me, because I already knew about what all these things was. So I know my brain wasn't telling me what it was telling this thing what all of these things was. And from that point on, I had a grayscale I couldn't really see color that good anymore. From the time that thing entered me, for about the next, I don't know, man, maybe year to 15 months or so, it was like I was looking through two sets of eyes, but it was a gray scale. Everything was a gray scale and a gray tint. I later learned that what had entered me from studying and reading, and also from my later visit with the angels that came to me, that this was the spirit of Elijah that descended upon me. So from that day forth, I started having these experiences where I started spitting and spewing scripture out of my mouth with no control. I had no control over it. It's like I became on fire for the Lord in scripture, and I began just, listen, even though I didn't necessarily want to do these things, I was seeking and crying out to God during this time because I wanted to save my marriage and fix things. And so I was truly seeking, and I was, doing a lot of reading my Bible and stuff like that and praying. And after this spirit entered me, though, it took on a whole new level. And I was also at this time still straddling the fence. I was still selling, I hadn't quit selling heavy drugs, but I was selling a lot of weed, and I was still doing drugs. So, and I was making good money. My business was doing good too, but everything was going good. So, in the streets. So I didn't really, the last thing I wanted to do was to change my life at that particular point in time, because I was chasing money, and I was happy with how things were going, other than the fact that my wife and I were on rocky grounds. So when this started to happen, I was very distraught, but there was nothing I could do about it. No matter what, I was spitting and speaking scripture. And so I started making religious videos and all, where I started, talking about the Bible and trying to teach, but I was also doing it in a very aggressive manner, an angry manner, because I said I was halfway torn anyway. But anyways, I wasn't doing it right. I was cussing at people, not necessarily cussing at people, but as I would be speaking and reading the scripture and getting mad at what I would be using cuss words or profanity. There's a difference between cussing and cursing. So what I was doing was cussing, which is still frowned upon because it's foul language. Now, next. So this is getting kind of long, so let me just get. So, in fact, it will go faster if I just read a lot of the stuff. So, I started having an experience where I would be pinned down, blah, blah. Something entered me. Afterwards, it was as if I was appearing through two sets of eyes. Later, next, the still small voice. I read about it in a book by David Icke, which immediately made me remember where I had heard it before. In the Bible, it is the story in 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 through 13. In short, is where the prophet Elijah fled into the wilderness in fear and exhaustion. He went to a mountain expecting to hear God through spectacular loud phenomena. He expected to hear God through all of these big things, earthquakes, fire, and all of that. But when God finally spoke to him, it was in a whisper, in a still small voice. So, since the book I was reading wasn't quoting the Bible when it mentioned this phrase, the still small voice, but a totally different culture from Central and South American origins, I began to seek and do research on all I could find throughout history where this phrase was mentioned or talked about. What I learned was that over time and throughout different cultures, it has been called different things. An example, the voice of the silence, the voice of the stillness, the divine whisper, or the gentle whisper, etc., etc., but none more so than the still small voice. I learned how different cultures use different substances to put themselves into a trance state in order to still their minds and silence the noise from the outside world to hear this voice clearer, and how some cultures use meditation to accomplish this. The Indians used peyote and different substances. The Africans and Eskimos used saunas and sweat sculptures and different herbs and plant extracts. The Greeks and the Romans, they used to chew laurel leaves to hear the voice, the oracle and God's voice. Asians use plant extracts and meditation techniques, Asians and Indians, but none more famous than the cricket. The most famous of all these incidents is the cricket, where because in antiquity, in ancient times, people would pay very large sums of money for one cricket in a golden cage. One little small cricket, yes. The modern day thing, the cricket. That chirp, 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 that. Because they learned in ancient times that the sound that the cricket makes when it rubs its back legs together, that chirp, chirp, chirp that you hear at night, this can help to put you into a trance state. And I have learned since then that any sound like the cricket makes, or any repetitive sound like an AC unit, the kind outside where the thing has a fan spinning in it. I've used exhaust fans in prison, all types of things. Anything that makes a whoop, 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 or any type of repetitive sound like that, you can use to help you faster get into a trance state or a deep state of meditation. So once they learned this in antiquity, they used to pay a lot of money for crickets. All right. So I learned some of this stuff from Tibetan monks and their practices. And like I said, intentionally doing it and from unintentionally doing it, from smoking spice and sitting next to an air conditioning unit outside my old house, like I just told y'all. All right. The Book of Enoch. I've been reading it for several years at this point, and it spoke to me like no other from scripture I'd ever read in the Bible, as far as revealing the whole truth about what happened and what is going to happen. This, along with the fact that I long ago noted that Enoch was the only man mentioned in the genealogy records who didn't die, but God took him, made me seek further and look further for the other books that had been excluded from the accepted canon, which is the 66 books in the Holy Bible. In short, it led me to the Apocrypha, and ultimately, though, to the Ethiopian Bible. I'm cutting through some of this stuff because my testimony is getting kind of long. I don't want to run y'all off. Mind you, throughout the years, I also sought out and studied Gnosticism, the Quran and Islamic teachings, Buddha and the Buddhist teachings, Hinduism, Confucianism, Egyptian and Persian and Greek mysteries, Druidism, and Zoroastrianism. Ultimately, though, Zoroastrianism led me on a path because through my studies, I learned that out of all of these things, the oldest religion that mentioned angels, heaven, and an eternal fire was Zoroastrianism. This was the first religion in recorded history that I've ever been able to find that mentioned angels and these beings and all of this stuff, other than the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, which is even older, that speaks about the children of light, which are also angels. But Zoroastrianism speaks about angels in that particular term and eternal flame and all of that. So anyway, I learned that each of these religions or teachings held elements of truth to them, as well as the science and the alchemical teachings. In any case, the very last incidents I spoke about, where I was pinned down and something descended and settled down upon me and entered me, I later was told by the angels that this is called the spirit of Elijah. You see, rivers of living water in scripture began to spew from my mouth and spirit, even though it wasn't necessarily my intention to do so. I already explained that to y'all. Okay. So the next thing that happened, as I told y'all, I was seeing through two sets of eyes and could only see grayscale for a long period of time. Couldn't see color anymore. I told my wife about this. She got worried. I went to eye doctors and all this stuff, and they could see and they could tell something was up with my eyes, but they didn't know what was going on. As I've told y'all before, see, a lot of this stuff had to do with my pineal gland being activated, my pineal gland, and my third eye being open, but I didn't know these things at the time. All I knew is that a doctor told me After Clearwater PD let that dog bite me in the face, and you know, I was suing them. I had to go to a bunch of doctors, and this old man, eye doctor, he shined a light in my eye. He said, "My God," and all of this and that. And he said, "I've been doing this a long time, over 50 years. He said, "Your eyes are the most sensitive to light that I have ever seen in my life. Your eyes are very reactive to light." And so later, through studying Thoth and Egyptian mysteries and knowledge and all that, I learned that once the pineal gland is activated and your third eye is open, these two eyes come way more sensitive and receptive to light. All right. So, laying on my couch one night, after all of this, I was praying to God and having an experience, and I was very distraught. Me and my wife were still going through it. I was, you know, getting depressed because I couldn't understand what was going on in my life with me speaking all this scripture and doing all of this stuff. And so I was crying out to God, and I was saying, "God, what is my purpose here? Why am I here?" And he spoke to me clearly. Boom, he said, I was laying on my couch on my back. And he spoke to me clearly, and he said, "Watchman. You are a watchman, John. A watchman, like Ezekiel." And as soon as he said that, my stomach blew up really big. Whoosh. And something, it was like it did like this, but from the bottom up. It rolled like this, as if something was leaving from here and traveling up my torso. And I can feel it too, all the way until it came up and got in my throat, and my mouth opened, and whoosh, something came out of my mouth in a big gust of air. Whoosh, it left my body. And because it almost choked me, I sat up fast on the couch breathing. And when I sat up on the couch and leaned forward like this, two things fell out of my eyes. And they looked like scales, like fish scales, but they were light. They were floating down like this, like feathers. And so immediately I tried to catch them, see what it was. And when they hit my hand, they disintegrated. And when I looked up and looked around, I could see clearly again. I could see color and everything vividly, like I could before. Whatever entered me. And from that day on, I've been able to see out of my own eyes regularly. You know, nothing like that has happened again. So whatever it was that entered me, which I've been told was the spirit of Elijah, that was all related to that. And it was probably God's doing. Okay. Next. I began seeking everything I could about a watchman and what this term meant. Of course, I had heard the term before when reading the Bible and reading about the story of Ezekiel, the most famous watchman in Scripture, and also when about reading the stories of the Old Testament, especially about Jerusalem. But since God specifically mentioned Ezekiel by name, saying, "John, you are a watchman like Ezekiel," I turned to the book of Ezekiel in the Bible and read it again in its entirety. But it is Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 16 through 21 that explains his role and duties as a watchman. It says, "At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to me." That's what Ezekiel said. "Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to them to dissuade them from their evil ways in order to save their life, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood." Verse 19. "But if you do warn the wicked person and they do not turn from their wickedness and from their evil ways, they will die for their sins, but you will have saved yourself." Verse 20. "Again, when a righteous person turns from their righteousness and does evil, and I put a stumbling block before them, they will die. Since you did not warn them, they will die for their sin. The righteous things that person did will not be remembered, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. Verse 21. But if you do warn the righteous person not to sin, and they do not sin, they will surely live because they took warning, and you will have saved yourself. Now, once I read all that, this greatly spurred me into action, and it also put a lot of fear in me because, as I've often told many of y'all, man, I don't fear nothing but the Lord. I've always, since I was young, y'all see my body is covered in tattoos. One of my very first tattoos is this scroll right here. It got 2 Bible verses on it, but the first one, the top one, is Matthew 10:28. And what it says is, fear not those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but fear him who can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. So what that, I took that to mean is, don't fear man, fear God. And I always have lived by that. So this scared me. I'm like, man, what? So because God tells me to do this and do that and to warn people, if I don't do it, and you know, and of course I read all the books about Jonah and all the other, you know what I'm saying, people of the Bible who God gave them instructions to do, and then they disobeyed, how things would happen. And you know, all of this worried me. So I said, well, I got to do what I got to do then. I'm going to obey the voice of the Lord, and I'm going to listen. So I began to do it, or attempt to do it, as I told y'all, and I was making those videos. So once I learned how to put myself into a trance state to hear the still small voice and talk to God, and I began practicing it and doing it regularly, this is how my very first conversation went, where I spoke to God and he spoke back to me, and then I spoke to him and he spoke back to me, a back and forth conversation. It's very short. It went just like this. Once I realized that God had spoken out to me, I said, who are you? And what is your name? Because I had learned that we're supposed to test any spirit or any type of entity that comes to us. We're supposed to test it. And the way that you testing it is by asking it, who is it? What's his name? Its intentions, all of that. So you can see if it has good intentions or bad intentions, because the tree is known by its fruit. And also, if you read a lot or you know enough and you learn about names, you can identify some of these beings just by their name if they say who they is. So I said, who are you and what is your name? He said, I am Yah. I said, well, where are you? Because I wanted to see if this being would say, well, I'm in heaven, or I'm in paradise, or I'm in LA, or I'm in New York, or where. I wanted to see where it would say it was located at, so that I can use my own brain and intelligence to determine if I thought this being was being honest with me. I said, where are you? He said, I am in all things living. And I said, yeah, but what type of being are you? And God said, I am a supreme being. That's how that conversation went. Now, next, I started to assert the name and promote all things only in relation to Yah. And I turned away from using the name Jesus and telling others to do so as well. Because God revealed himself by the name Yah, and the prophets had Yah in all their names, and especially from learning Jesus' earthly name was Joshua or Yahshua, I assumed that the name Jesus was made up or introduced to us by, you know, Christians or white people, basically, instead of it being a true name associated with God or his son. I assumed that was a made up name, that we should only go by the name, you know, Yah and Yahshua, since that was Jesus's name when he was on earth. It was Joshua ben Joseph. Joshua, son of Joseph, is what he was called in Israel. But that translates to Yahshua. But anyway, I started trying to tell people don't use the name of Jesus because of those things I just said. And so the next thing that happened because of that, that was an error though for me to do that. I learned later that was error, that I was wrong about trying to tell people not to use the name of Jesus, because Jesus truly is really the name above all names, and it's associated with God truly, as I explained in another one of my videos, and I'll probably explain in a second. But the next thing that happened was I started seeing all types of strange activity above my house in the night sky, and I started receiving strange calls from Washington, D.C. as I was making these videos and putting stuff on Facebook and publicly making statements that this is happening to me, that is happening to me, stuff like that. I started having a lot of strange activity go on around my house. The first thing I noticed is because I was always looking up and watching the stars and looking at the night sky, I started seeing a lot of stuff moving around that shouldn't be moving. I started seeing a lot of stuff that appeared to be stars and lights and appeared to be stationary one moment, but then they would move. And I said, man, those are crabs. These are something, it's something up there moving around, flying. And so I started, when people would be in my house at night, because by this time my wife was staying, I saw her even before, but by this time she was staying a lot at her mother's house because I was having too much weed and stuff like that in the house. She didn't want to be in there. So whoever would come over, girls, my homeboys, all this, I started showing some of them stuff up in the sky. And they started seeing that joint like, what the hell? And they were surprised too. But I started getting all these strange calls. Whenever I answered my phone, it would always be people trying to inquire and ask me who I was, what my name was, and stuff like that. And I could tell that they were trying to seek out information from me. So as I did my investigations and traced them all back, they all traced back to Washington, D.C. So, next, okay. This, out of everything in my testimony, is the most unbelievable, crazy, shocking situation and point of all of them. I'm sitting in my house and I'm sitting on my couch and my wife is on the other couch right there and she's asleep. I'm watching YouTube videos about Tibet and about monks and about the rainbow body and all of this stuff, and I sensed something to my right where the front door is at that doorway. And when I looked that way, I seen, it appeared as if a portal or something was opening. You know how if you're outside on a hot day or you're driving down the road on a hot day and you look ahead and you see, it looks like waves or smoke rising up off the road, off the concrete. This is what I saw at my front door. 3 beings stepped through that portal. They were very tall, very tall. They were so tall that when they got into my living room, my house in Holiday had a low ceiling. When they got into my living room, they were hunched over. They were all black, all dark, and as if the top, whatever they had over their head, looked like a hood. They looked as if they looked like the Grim Reaper's outfit looked. And their face inside here, it was all dark. I couldn't see their faces, but they were very tall and hunched over, and they were in all black. And it appeared to be a 4th one standing behind them, trying to come in the portal behind them. But 3 of them came in right abreast of each other, came into my living room. And I said, and I jumped up. I was like, who are you? Who are y'all? Get out of my house. And they were just staring at me. I was like, get out of my house, like trying to shoot them out. And they were just looking at me. They wouldn't move. And I was like, I'm not afraid of y'all. Get the F out of my house. Because I was getting angry. I was like, whoever y'all are, I ain't afraid of y'all. Get out of my house. And they started to come towards me. But it wasn't like they was walking. It was like they was gliding across the floor towards me. And immediately, the first thing I did was I jumped over to the side to get between them and my wife, because I told you she was laying right there on the other couch. So my first instinct was to protect her. Like, so I jumped in between them, them and her. I'm like, get the F out of my house. What are y'all doing here? Who are y'all? Get out of here. I'm not afraid of y'all. And I was yelling at them to the top of my damn lungs. She did not budge. The next thing that happened was I heard a voice tell me, say, John, what are you doing? You know what to do. You know the scriptures. And immediately after that voice told me, John, you know what to do. You know the scriptures. I had the thought immediately, well, the scriptures say that in the name of Jesus, everything will flee at the sound of that name. And I have been telling people for the past few months not to even use the name Jesus. I believe this is ultimately why God made me have this experience. But at that point, I wanted these things out of my house, and I wanted to protect my wife. And I could tell that they were ominous. They were emitting a dangerous, ominous energy. And so I told them, in the name of Jesus, get out of my house. And when I said that, immediately, a light so bright, a light as bright as the sun, if not brighter than the sun. How you doing? Came from behind me. I was facing these beings, and when I said, in the name of Jesus, get out of my house, immediately, boom, my whole living room lit up as if the sun itself was like 5 feet away from me, behind me. And it stunned me and scared me. I was like, whoa, what? But I couldn't look back, because every time I tried to look back, it was too bright. I couldn't see. It hurt my eyes. But when I looked forward, these beings was backing up. They was backing up. And they slid right back to that portal and right back in it and went the way they came. And they left my house. And that light was shining and burning so bright in my living room that I hit the floor. And listen, as soon as the light came on, I heard a powerful voice boom. It said, flee from here. You can't have him. And they backed up and they started fleeing and they left out. But let me tell y'all something. That voice, when I heard that voice, I hit the floor and balled up and was afraid. That voice sounded like nothing I have ever heard in my life before then or since then. And even though I could tell by the words, because I could understand the words, even though I could tell that the voice was protecting me and saving me, that voice sounded like thunder to the 100th power, and like trains and rivers and a torrent. I was so afraid I hit the ground, and I remember having the thought, please, ceiling, roof, just fall down on me and hide me from that beam. I remember having these thoughts clearly. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't in a trance, nothing when all of this happened. Because when it first started happening, I did the few tests and tricks that I had learned from studying to tell if I'm in an awake state or if I'm in a dream state. I ain't gonna get in all that, but trust me, I was wide awake when this happened and I wasn't high. That voice scared me so bad that, just like in the Bible, when the Israelites told Moses, or whatever story it was, where they say, "Well, you speak to him, you talk to God, you deal with him, man. We don't even want to hear that voice no more." They thought it was thundering when God was talking. And they were like, "Lest we might die." That's just how I felt again. I'm like, man, look at here. If I hear that voice again, I might die. So this is why I know, bro. Let me tell y'all, every knee is going to bow. Bruh, I ain't scared of nothing, not even death. But that scared the hell out of me. And when God comes, if he sound anything like he did, if he speak to us any way like he did when he came that day to save me, boy, all y'all gonna hit the ground. So anyway, let me try to wrap this up. I got a few other things to say, but I am just going to say, so I can't skip over these next two things. I can't skip over this part right here, because the next thing that happened was two beings came to my house, and this time they weren't dark beings, they were beings of light. They looked like light and water a mixture of particles of light and water, particles of water mixed, and there was two of them, and they was big and tall. And when they came into my house, I didn't feel ominous or afraid of them like the other ones, but I did feel an energy radiating off of them so powerful that as soon as they got close to me, I fell on my face and hit the floor, because I could just tell that I was in the presence of something way greater and more powerful than me at the time. So their energy alone made me fall on my face and put my head to the ground. And they got me up. These two beings came to my house and spent time with me for a period of 2 weeks straight. And even though I knew that they were teaching me things and learning me things and were not there to harm me, still every time they came within my presence, I hit the ground and got on my face. Not even trying to do it. This was a natural reaction that my body would do. All right. The first thing these two beings started talking to me about was my name. They introduced themselves to me and told me that they were Michael and Gabriel. The first thing they started to talk to me about was my name. They said, "John, do you know why you have the name John?" I said, "Yeah. My daddy's name is Johnny, and I have another brother named Johnny Wade. And because Johnny is already, my brother Wade is already named after my daddy with the name Johnny, my mama named me John, the short of it, so that both of us, our name wouldn't be Johnny, because that's what my mama told me." I said, "So that's why my name is John." They said, "No. It was just made to look that way. You were named John because of John the Baptist." I said, "What?" I said, "No. I was named John because my daddy's name was Johnny." They said, "No." They were being very calm as they were talking to me and treating me like, but I argued with them and they told me, "No. Things aren't always what they seem, and you were made to, it was just made to look that way as a coincidence that way, but really, truly, you were named after John the Baptist." Hey, that's what they told me, y'all. I'm just telling y'all how it went. One of the next experiences that happened is one day while they were there, they said, "We want to show you something." And boom, they took me and they shot me up into space, or the astral realm, whatever you want to call it. They shot me way, way, way up there, and they were with me. And I was scared. I was looking around because I can look down and see the earth way down there. And as I turned and looked this way, I could see out into space. And it was very dark, besides lights that I was seeing twinkling far away. But what I noticed was that it was layer after layer after layer after layer after layer stacked on top of each other. I could see layers like this just stacked up and vibrating really, really, really fast. I mean, vibrating at a very high intensity. And I was looking at these things and I was like, and in my mind, I took it to mean these are different planes. These are different planes of existence. These are different levels. Because a lot of times they would speak to me telepathically. They wouldn't speak to me all the time right out in a loud voice, even though most of the time that's how they were speaking to me. But a lot of times they would just transmit stuff to me telepathically, even at my house. But up here, they were speaking to me, just speaking to my brain and showing me things. I would look, and then they would be explaining to me what I'm looking at. And to make a long story short, when I came back down from there, I was crying and I was shaking. And I remember coming back with two or three distinctions in my mind that although I didn't know how I knew it other than what I just saw, when I came back from up there, in my heart, I knew three things for a fact. The first thing I came back with, the first notion I came back with was that God is love. See, I had a little black book back then that I was writing all of this stuff in, all of these experiences. I journaled it and wrote it down. I just don't know what my wife did with it at this point, or if it's still in my property. But I wrote all of this stuff down. I came back and I said, I knew that God is love. The second thing I knew is that time is not linear as we look at it here. Time is not linear, running in one straight direction. That's not how it works. They explained this to me. Time is not linear like that. The past, the future, the present, all these things are happening, going on at once. And we can affect them. And the number three things I came back with knowing is that there are different planes of existence stacked upon one upon the other and vibrating at a very, very high intensity, as I just explained to y'all. Okay, I'm gonna skip one thing because it's about, I started trying to get the Illuminati. Once I went to making these videos, they came at me hard, trying to get me and promising me anything and everything I wanted if I would join them. This was in 2020. Okay. The last thing, okay. Jesus himself ascends and teaches me. Same result. I fall on my face. He teaches me things for 2 or 3 days, and because I had not learned to use my gift of interpretation yet, I made a couple of errors in deciphering his message, but not all of it. But yea, I assumed and leaned on my own understanding of what he was revealing instead of letting the Spirit lead me and interpret what certain visions and events meant. And this is because all of this stuff was happening to me and I knew that it was happening to me. I, despite what others, were thinking, I knew that these things were truly happening. So in my mind, I felt like whenever they would show me something, it meant that this was going to come to pass or this was going to take place. But sometimes they were just showing me things for different reasons to educate me and teach me, and I was supposed to use my gift of interpretation to find out what these signs meant. If they didn't tell me directly, I was supposed to interpret them, but I wasn't even trying to interpret them. If they would show me something, I would say, okay, well, this person is this or this is that, this and that, like I did with Kanye West. All right. So I began making spiritual videos and attempting to try to teach the truths that had been revealed to me, but I was doing it in error. Like I said, I was cussing at people and doing a couple of other things on video. So one night, my sister came to visit me. My sister Pam, as I said, so By this point, my sister Pam had got killed by her husband. So I need to back up. I kind of like wanted to tell this part at the end of my testimony because I didn't want to mix it in early because I knew it would make me emotional and probably make me cry. But eventually what happened was I was on my way back to prison, and I had to turn myself in the next day. And so my sister Pam, my mama, and my sister Pam's 3 girls, they took me out to dinner to Joe's Crab Shack, you know, to take me out the night before I went to prison. So what happened was, and you know, and my ex-wife Krista. So what happened was we were sitting in Joe's Crab Shack, and Joe's Crab Shack has picnic tables. On that side was Pam and her girls, the twins and KK, were sitting all lined up. And on this side, it was me, my wife was on one side of me, and my mom was on the other side of me. And as I was eating, I looked up, and I looked at Pam, and she was glowing. She had a white light all the way around her, all the way around her body, like it looked like a trick or magic. She had a white light shining all the way around her. I know now that I was seeing her aura and seeing other things, because as I began to become clairvoyant and my pineal gland opened more and more and more, I've seen other people's auras since then, but Pam's was the first one I ever saw. And I didn't realize what was happening then because I didn't have the knowledge I have now. But when I saw this, I looked at Pam and I was like, what the hell? And she looked so beautiful. She looked so serene and like an angel. And I was like, my fork was stuck in my mouth like this. I'm like, what the hell is going on? Because I looked at the girls next to her and they weren't glowing. I looked back at Pam, she was still glowing. I lifted my head up, looked around the room, wasn't nobody else glowing. I looked at Pam, she was still glowing. I looked next to me at my wife, she wasn't glowing. Looked at my mama, she wasn't glowing. I looked at Pam, Pam alone had a white light around her. I said, what the hell is going on here? I wasn't high or nothing like that because I had told myself I ain't even finna get high before we go in here. I'm gonna get high after we leave because I didn't want to be high around my mom and them girls and them while they was trying to celebrate me going to prison. So I said, I'm gonna wait till I leave here before I even smoke. So I wasn't high. This is what I truly saw. Anyway, as we was leaving there that night, once we got up to leave and walk out, I remember hearing a voice say, you see, John, you're supposed to protect them. This is your family. You're supposed to be out here to protect them, and yet you finna go to prison again. And I bust out crying right there, and all of them was like, what's wrong, bro? What's wrong? You know what's wrong? And I told him, I said, I'm supposed to be out here to protect y'all, not going to prison. And I didn't know why I felt like that. But I turned myself in, I went to prison. And man, I wasn't even in prison 2 months before my sister's husband killed her. So that was probably God warning me that. And that was the last time, you know, when I saw Pam glowing like that, that was the last time I ever saw her alive. So maybe that was some type of sign too. But anyway, back to the current part of the story. I'm sitting in my house. You know, after I had them begin doing the religious teaching and all of that, I'm sitting in my house and Pam comes to me and Pam appears to me and she looked so beautiful. She was white. Now this time she looked it as if she was in angel garb. She was in a long white robe. She was shining. She had light all around her, but now she had light radiating from her head. And she sat. I started crying because I was so happy to see her. I was so depressed and going through so much. at the time. That I was so happy to see my sister. And I remember her telling me, she said, bro, don't cry. And she was crying with me though, but she was crying like happy tears. I was boo-hoo crying. Like, she was like, bro, don't cry, because you know what? She said, I'm proud of you and I'm happy with the things you're doing, Anthony. And she said, and so is God. She said, even the angels are smiling down upon you, bro, for the work you out here doing. She said they like the way you're spreading the word, you're reading the scripture, and you're trying to deliver messages. She said, but bro, I came to warn you about something that you must stop doing. She said, and I remember her saying, and they don't use, and this isn't even usually allowed, but because your mission is so important, and because they know how close you and I are, they allowed me this special privilege to come and speak to you myself. This is exactly what she said. And she said, bro, when you're making your videos and when you're in the public eye, she said, you have to stop cussing. She said, and you have to stop losing your temper and getting mad with people. She said, and the last thing you have to stop doing, she said, you have to stop smoking cigarettes on these videos and in the public eye. She said, because Yah doesn't like being represented in that way. He doesn't like one of his representatives representing him like that in the public eye. This is exactly what she said to me. She's saying, bro, I came to tell you that if you don't stop, if you don't listen to my warning and you don't stop, she said within the next 2 weeks, you're going to be locked back up, going to prison. And we talked for a little while longer, cried together, and then she left me. Now, mind you, I had been out of prison for 6 years. This was the longest I had gone without doing a major bid or getting locked up since I was 13 years old or so. I usually only stay out maybe a year and a half, boom, I'm gone again. I had been out 6 years this time. Like I said, I went to the county jail one time during this, but I got out, so I didn't go to prison. But I was doing so good in my life, and I wasn't doing anything terribly wrong at this time. So, you know, aside from acting crazy, running around arguing with a few dudes. But in any case, I didn't have a sense that, or a fear that I was on my way to prison. The last thing I thought was that I would be going to prison because I hadn't been out so long doing good. So her warning, even though I believed her and I trusted my sister, her warning didn't take root. I kept right on moving the same way I was moving and continued doing the same things, other than the fact that I stopped smoking cigarettes and losing my temper as much as I could in the public videos I would make about spiritual stuff, but I was still doing it in my regular videos that wasn't about the Bible. But it doesn't matter. See, the thing is, if you're a representative of God, people are going to look at you and watch you at all times, not just when you're talking about him. They're going to watch your move and your walk even when you're not talking about him. And this is what I didn't understand. So I kept right on doing the same things. And 11 days later, that's 3 days short of 2 weeks. Just like my sister saying, 2 weeks, if you don't stop, you'll be going back. 11 days later, I was in jail, headed back to prison, facing 15 years to life. And I did 6 years off of that and just came home. So, definitely made a believer out of me. And I will never not heed God's warning again. You know. Let me see how long this thing is running. All right, I'm already at 1 hour and 40 minutes. But some of this stuff is just too important for me to skip, especially if I'm trying to give y'all my true testimony. So I gotta record it. If it's too long for some of y'all, just don't watch it, but this is the truth and I gotta give it. I got locked up. I started having strange incidences where people would come up and say, hey, a voice told me to bring this to you, or some feeling told me to bring this to you. And I started hearing those tones again and being directed to look at the TV. So I had begun hearing tones and noises. As I told y'all in another video earlier, that this same thing was happening to Muhammad. But I would begin hearing tones and noises, and I had learned from experience from them happening so many times that if I didn't obey and listen, if I didn't pay attention to these tones, or I tried to ignore them, they would just keep going on and on until I paid attention and did whatever it was requiring me to do. And usually it was telling me to either go look at something or to write something down. And so I started hearing these tones again and being directed to look at the TV. Each time it was the same exact symbol, which made me take notice because I always had paid attention to patterns and any anomalies. I didn't know what this symbol was at the time. However, later, while studying Plato and what is called the Platonic solids, and through studying Thoth and ancient symbols, I learned that this symbol is called the dodecahedron. It is a geometric shape, and the Platonic solids are considered the pillars of sacred geometry. They are considered the fundamental building blocks of creation in the universe, representing essential elements and profound spiritual concepts. They are the tetrahedron, the hexahedron, the cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. But each time I was told to look at the TV, a book, or an image, etc., it was always the dodecahedron presented to me. Not until later, when I was reintroduced to the Emerald Tablets again and began intense study of the pyramids around the earth again, and through reading certain ancient scriptures, especially the writings of King Solomon, did I begin to be instructed on the significance of the tetrahedron, which essentially is the triangle shape, the shape of the pyramids. The thing that made this all stand out to me most, though, was the fact that all my life, math was the least favorite subject. Math was my least favorite subject, and the only form of math that I did absolutely love and enjoyed immensely in high school was geometry. Till this very day, I love geometry. So, in any case, here are some of the books that came to me from these strange experiences of people coming up to me in that manner during my lifetime. One was called The Children of the Matrix, and another one was The Introduction to the Raw Materials, The Introduction to Gnosis, and another was How to Know the Higher Worlds, to name a few. Introduction to the Raw Materials is also known as The Law of One. Each of these books contained truths and knowledge that just led me further and further along the paths of knowledge. And each time I learned what was accurate and true or inaccurate by either being directed by these same spiritual beings that came to me, that called themselves the Children of Light, or by silencing my thoughts and stilling my mind and asking God directly, as I trained myself to be able to do easily, now so that I will always be directed by God or Jesus themselves, opposed to leaning on my own understanding. For as I am continuously being told, it is I, John, whom they have appointed to make the pathways straight and to warn the people of the earth of what beliefs are true and accurate teachings and what are false, deceptive ones. And that, my good people, is why I am now doing the things I am doing, because not only do I fear the retribution of the Lord, but I also genuinely love all the people of the earth. I may not like certain individuals or approve of their actions, but I love everyone as a people and as a race. We are all humanity. Lastly, I would like to talk about the phrase Son of Man. Of course, the most common place this term is used is in the Bible in relation to Jesus, but it was first mentioned in the book of Enoch, but still in reference to the coming Messiah Jesus. However, as I have investigated and did my research on the phrase, I found that the phrase goes back even further back into antiquity, and much further than that even. All the way back, as far as I was able to discover, to the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. However, it is spelled differently, as it is in some other sources, as Son of Man, S-U-N, opposed to Son, S-O-N. And what that term meant in the Emerald Tablets was a messenger or guiding light to humanity, which essentially still does describe Jesus, who was and is the ultimate guiding light to humanity. And because in the Bible, Ezekiel was called by the Lord himself, Son of Man, and I was told by Yah himself that I am a watchman like Ezekiel, I take that to mean God expects me to be a guiding light and a messenger. Therefore, I consider it my duty and responsibility to spread and emit light and love, opposed to darkness and hate. And that, my dear people, is my testimony. Thank God that it's over with. I know y'all about tired of me. I've been doing this for all going on close to 2 hours now. Peace be with you all. Hallelujah. And may God bless us all and direct each and every one of our steps. And there you have it, people. That is my full testimony for the first time given to the world of why I do what I do, why I speak what I speak, why I teach what I teach, and why I'm going to continue to do it, because I fear the Lord, and I am John, and I'm going to do my duty just like I've been told. I love y'all. Thank y'all for listening. Thank y'all for watching. Everybody who stuck with this through the end, and may God bless y'all.